All right, super pumped to have somebody who I'm a really big fan of, and I've watched your show for many, many years. I've learned a ton from you, and I'm a big fan of yours. Natalie Brunell, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm excited. I'm a fan. I have to drop a couple compliments on you. First of all, you wrote an amazing book, which we're going to talk a lot about, I'm sure. But
Thank
second of
you.
all, one of my favorite things about you and you as an ambassador for the Bitcoin space is when you go on mainstream media appearances on like Fox Business, and you are just like such a perfect ambassador for Bitcoin because you always do it with like grace. You give great answers, and they always try to get you with like a gotcha question or two and try to make you stumble and fumble. And you just smile right through it. And whether it's Peter Schiff or some host, you always just nail the answer, and those responses always go viral. And I always think that's cool.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I'm my own worst critic. I do watch myself back. I think that's important because I was trained to do that when I worked in television, but it doesn't come easily because I was a reporter for over 10 years where I had to practice, short and sweet sound bites. So, if you think I've gotten good at it, then I'm really grateful, but I feel like I can always improve.
Well, from where I sit, you always nail it, and it's always like they give you 60 seconds before they're going to break. They try to like needle you, and you always dismantle that. So I thought that was cool. Well, all right, I have to start with the first question I always like to ask the guests, which is, what is your favorite thing about Bitcoin?
The people that I've met, the people along the way. I have said on a couple of shows that if I'm wrong, I'm wrong on the right team. I think that Bitcoin has brought together some of the most brilliant people. Truly, just like I learned so much. They're so intelligent. They're so well read. They have such fascinating, diverse experiences. They've built companies. They've traveled the world. And then also, they're just so kind and they want to give back and they've been so welcoming. So I truly think that our community is second to none.
I agree. I agree with the statement of even if we're wrong about this thing, like it's still worth. It's still worth. Do you believe that? Like, what if we end up being wrong? What if the fudsters are right, the fiat maxis are right, whatever? I don't know, it goes to zero or something. How will you feel about whether this journey was worth it or not?
Well, luckily, I don't think we're wrong. I actually, because of the people in the space, I actually think
Yeah.
we're very, very right. And I feel fortunate to be earlier than others. I'm certainly not early enough, right? We're all not early enough. But no, I don't worry about it. I just kind of tease when I say that. We do
Yeah.
have some battles that we're going to have to confront. And truly, Bitcoin is unstoppable. The more that you learn about it, the more that you realize what a digital fortress it is, and the fact that the incentives line up so that everyone eventually gets on board. And it is, in many ways, this powerful Trojan horse that I think is going to revolutionize and improve a lot of the institutions that people have really lost trust in over the past few decades. I think it does really offer hope to a lot of people, but it's going to be interesting to see how the game theory plays out, right? Because governments are incentivized to keep their fiat currencies as powerful as possible. And I do hope that we avoid some type of violent war. I think that we will, just given some of the geopolitical shifts that have happened that I've been following pretty closely. I think we will actually be able to avoid war here. But I mean, zoom out and look. I mean, there's people fighting all over the world somewhere at every point in time, right? So I hope that Bitcoin actually does bring some more peace and more opportunity for the average person globally, because some of the things that have happened under fiat are truly unbelievable and devastating and has led to so much human suffering. And we finally have a tool where we can kind of dig our way out of it. It won't be easy and it won't be overnight, but we can finally dig our way out of it globally and maybe reset the whole system on a stronger foundation that is more fair for every person.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that kind of obviously the name of the book, which just came out recently, which is an amazing book, Bitcoin is for everyone. I do find an interesting irony in the title in doing what I do, which is making content and putting out content about Bitcoin like you do. A lot of the people in the comments don't think Bitcoin is for everyone. They don't think Bitcoin is for them, right? They think a lot of negative things about Bitcoin, and they don't think there's anything wrong with the existing system. So how do you sort of square the circle on Bitcoin is for everyone? You believe that, I believe that, but not everyone believes it's for them, or definitely doesn't believe it's for everyone.
I mean, it's funny because I had no issue, no time wasted when asked what I wanted the title to be. I mean, for me, it was pretty immediate. I wanted it to be called Bitcoin is for everyone because I truly believe that. Bitcoin is an accessible network that's open to everyone around the whole globe. It is permissionless. It doesn't care what your bank account looks like. It doesn't care if you're worth a fortune or worth nothing at all. You have permission to use it. And I think that that's something that's so incredible. But the folks that don't think it's for them because they benefit from the fiat system, I guess that's not surprising, right? Because what's the saying? If your job relies on you not understanding it, then you're probably going to just close your eyes to everything that Bitcoin offers. I think also Bitcoin requires some people to really kill their ego. And that's very tough for some people, especially those who knew about Bitcoin very early on. And there are some very prominent people, right? Maybe people in the audience will think of some right now while I'm talking about it. But if they have known about Bitcoin for a very long time and they could have bought it at $1 or $10 or a couple $100, it does smack you in the face when Bitcoin goes to $100,000 and like you probably feel a sense of regret and pain and agony, and it's harder to maybe enter at this point. That's not to say we're still not early, because we are a $2 trillion asset class heading to what I believe will be 50 and eventually $100 trillion. But it's got to hurt, right? Like if I knew about Bitcoin at $10, I'd be pretty bitter. But yeah, I mean, I think eventually, slowly but surely, just like every technology, people will find utility in it and be drawn to it for many of its great properties, whether that's the store of value aspect or the medium of exchange, the peer-to-peer network, or both. So eventually everyone will be converted. I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've heard it said that the Bitcoin price chart sort of becomes this price chart of shame for the people who deny it, right? Where as it just keeps going up, it's just a reminder of how many times they've been wrong, like you said, or how wrong they've been, and they can't put the ego aside. I think the other piece to that is they just think of it as an asset of, well, I'm too late to buy into this asset because it was lower before, as opposed to a new form of money that is superior monetary technology, where you're never too late to adopt superior technology. You say a lot that it like restores hope and restores, the American dream. And I know that's a large part of your personal story. How do you think like people can see past the FUD and the misinformation, and especially the volatility of like, well, you're saying it's better for me because I can store my value into the future and not have it be debased, but it's so volatile in fiat terms. So how do I square the circle? How do people square the circle on the FUD and the misinformation and the volatility to kind of see that it is this thing that can restore hope and the American dream for them?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, truly, because I do remember what it was like when I first started in Bitcoin. And even though I did really well in school, I felt like I was always a very, very good student and well-read. I didn't realize how ignorant I was about the financial system and what money actually was, how it was issued, how the issuance impacted our wealth concentration and the purchasing power of the money. And so I had to take some time and really learn, because all those things also scared me. The volatility, the fact that it's digital, I thought it could be hacked. I thought it could be replicated. And so it just takes time. Just like any new technology, the more that you expose yourself to it and actually use it, learn about it, learn how it works, you come to really appreciate it. And Bitcoin, the journey you go on Bitcoin is truly an incredible one, because it is so different from, let's say, starting to use the internet or, having your first iPhone. It's truly life-changing. It makes you think about every aspect of your life differently. It makes you think about your time differently. It makes you think about like society's greatest problems, the affordability crisis, why the cost of living is exceeding people's incomes, how we've gotten so divided in this country, why the quality of things are deteriorating while prices are going up. Like you start to really understand how the world works when you learn about Bitcoin. And that process doesn't happen overnight. But like I wanted Bitcoin is for everyone to be a really gentle first step, especially for the newcomers, to say, hey, you can learn this. You know that something's wrong. Like the current system is not working. So let's break it down a little bit. Like why is it happening? Why are prices going up? How does the whole system work? And here's Bitcoin softly introduced as a hopeful path forward and a solution. And that's what I aimed for, because every one of us went on this journey. And I think if you have a pain point, you probably are more incentivized to look to Bitcoin as a solution. I know I did. I was feeling frustrated with my finances, even though I was working hard and excelling in my career. I was like, it's still not enough. And my family lost everything in the great financial crisis. And so like there were little pain points along the way where I was clearly searching for Bitcoin. I just didn't know it.
Oh, I totally think that that's true. So many people say Bitcoin is a solution in search of a problem. And it's so revealing that they either just haven't encountered one of the pain points of the problem that we talk about. They just haven't encountered it yet, which we all probably will at some point or another. But I always think of it as this thing of how to get some of them to see that they are affected by this problem, whether they really think it or not, whether they realize it or not. And so many people just shouting at capitalism or shouting at the government or shouting at whatever they think might be the manifestation of the problem. And then Bitcoiners over here just shouting into the void that like the money's broken, us repeating ourselves over and over.
Yeah.
And no one seems to want, a lot of people don't want to seem to believe it or accept that it's true. I find it this weird, I'm stuck on the fact that it's so strange that so many people are so resistant to it.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on some really interesting realities because today, let's say people have acquired assets. For most people, that's probably their house, and all of their net worth is sort of attached to the house. But until you study Bitcoin, you don't realize that it's almost like a false sense of prosperity because home values have become completely detached from their utility. They've been inflated because of all the money printing, which my book explains. And are you really doing that well if you have to sell your overpriced home for another overpriced home that probably needs like a complete remodel and a new roof and all this maintenance, and you're paying higher property taxes because of the higher values, all that? It's like you don't really come to appreciate how distorted everything has become. Like prices don't really mean anything anymore. What they actually signal is just your loss of purchasing power. And if you look, I find it fascinating to look at all those charts, whether it's a Big Mac or a movie ticket or an average house, and just seeing how it's skyrocketed over the years. But again, look at the quality. Like you're paying 10 times more than your grandparents did for the house that's now falling apart. And you have to pay way more than they did in property taxes. Or, the burger that's like now shrunk because of shrinkflation, in addition to the fact that it probably has a million chemicals in it because it's cheaper to make it that way than the one that was way cheaper a couple decades ago, right? I mean, the whole thing, it's when you study Bitcoin, you're like, oh my gosh, this has impacted every aspect of our lives. And here we are, we're like pointing the finger at each other. It's like, oh, it's politics. It's us versus them. It's left versus blue. Da, da, da. Let's elect someone else to fix it. No, you can't fix it that way. You've got to address the core problem, which is the financial system. And we thankfully have this parallel alternative system we can opt into peacefully, which is Bitcoin, which is immune to the thing that truly destroys our purchasing power, and that's inflation.
One thing that I see some people say as a follow-up to what you just said is, oh, well, I can just buy the S&P or Nvidia is outperforming Bitcoin, or why do I need Bitcoin if nobody stores their money in fiat? That would be stupid. So I'll just buy the stock market. What do you say to people who say that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so Nvidia is an interesting one because that's used as a very common example. Oh, it's outperformed Bitcoin. Okay, well, Nvidia is a company. I think that to put your entire life savings into a company that has leaders and products that you don't know what they're going to do or what's going to happen over the next 5-10 years, that's pretty risky. I mean, sure, you can have a little bit of your portfolio allocated, but do you want to, I'm talking about how are you saving for the next 50 years? How are you saving for your grandkids or great grandkids that might not even exist yet? Like, are you going to put everything into Nvidia? What if there's a competitor that surfaces? What if, another company comes out with a chip that obsolesces, them? What if something happens to the leadership? What if Nvidia's CEO gets plucked away and now he's working for another company? I mean, there are so many things. What if the jurisdictional, laws change? Who knows, right? And then when you look at something as broad as just the S&P 500, I think those types of indices are fascinating examples because they've basically tracked the rate that the money supply has been expanding. So you haven't actually been the genius that you think you have. You've essentially just preserved your purchasing power rather than substantially grown it, and Bitcoin typically outperforms the S&P by quite a bit. Of course, there might be some volatility along the way, but the S&P is just kind of a way to play it safe almost in order to track the dilution of the money supply. And if you do peel back the layers of the S&P, only a couple companies are carrying the whole entire index. A lot of the other companies underperform, they get replaced. The average lifespan of an S&P 500 company is only a few decades, and then then something happens. I mean, that's the reality of companies, especially at that level. So it's not as safe of a bet, right? When you take all of that into account. And I just see Bitcoin as actually so much simpler. It simplifies all of this. You don't have to think about it. You just stack, accumulate every day, week, bi-monthly, whatever it is, and you secure your future financially.
Yeah, you mentioned one of the things that like many things obviously that orange pilled me, but one of them was like seeing the chart of the M2 money supply alongside the S&P 500. You're like, these are the same line. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's where the money's going. Like the idea of inflation and real wages, do they keep up with it? You know, a lot of people will just say, well, inflation's not a big deal because real wages keep up. You're like, okay, well, real wages kind of keep up with CPI inflation. So peel back the layer of the onion on CPI and why that's manipulated to make it look like real
Yeah.
wages are keeping up. But even so, there's all this new money being introduced into the system. Where is that money going into all the assets that are having all the people get ahead of you? So even if you're keeping up with cost of living, you are not keeping up with the cost of getting ahead or building wealth over time is the way I sort of see it.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on some really important points. If you just listen to what the CPI is, the inflation rate that they report, it doesn't tell the whole story, and people know it doesn't, right? I mean, we hear it's around 2%, and that's the target. They're targeting a dilution rate for you of losing 2%, which compounds over time. But the reality is it is much higher than that, and the basket that they use can be manipulated. I've always thought it was actually very crazy that they measure rent by owner's equivalent rent, which essentially means they pull a bunch of homeowners who don't rent their places out, by the way, and say, how much would you rent this place out for? And it's basically a guess. It's like a guesstimate at best. And that's how they calculate rent. So that's generally underreported as far as costs, especially in big cities. My gosh, I lived in big cities the majority of my career, and that was a huge chunk of my paycheck, and that mattered. And it would go up every year. And my paycheck, slightly nudged up, but it never felt like it was enough. And if you do look at like prices across the board, and people are really frustrated about that right now, price of, different things at the grocery store and healthcare, insurance premiums, all these things, they're going up at a rate far higher than someone's paycheck. And you also pointed out the really the impacts of the Cantillon effect. When money is printed, it does tend to pool at the top because the closest to the money printer are the institutions. I talk about this in Bitcoin is for Everyone. Essentially, I mean, truly what happens, and this is what's so crazy, and I try to share this in the book in a very relatable way, but the central bank literally changes the balance at the biggest banks by the press of a button and just creates more money supply. And that money starts to flow, and it doesn't flow to your paycheck. It flows into assets first. Like that's the first place it goes. And so that's why today, of course, it feels out of reach for, someone to buy their first home. And these stock valuations have ballooned, even though the real economy is in some serious trouble. And we have all these layoffs and people feeling like they're paycheck to paycheck and struggling. The assets is where all the money went. And the average person doesn't own them, which is one of the messages of my book, is just like, in order to keep up and in order to get ahead, you have to own assets. And I argue why Bitcoin is the best asset.
You did a phenomenal job in the book. I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but any good Bitcoin book basically has to start with the whole first half of the book's not about Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Because you
Not
have to
about
understand
Bitcoin.
like what we're talking about. And I think you basically took in this book and summarized basically everything that I learned in the first, 5 years of Bitcoin. You were able to jam it into 200 pages, like very succinctly and clearly. If you had to like summarize into like maybe this is too hard of a way to ask this question. If you had to summarize like the first 100 pages of the book into a pretty quick, like, what's the problem? Why do people need this thing? Who cares? Why should I care? How would you sort of say that to somebody who's like, why should I even care?
Well, it's true what you said. The first half of the book is not about Bitcoin. So the first half, it's not even like Bitcoin is for everyone. The first half of the book is essentially like, why do people feel broke and unhappy and frustrated with the system, right? Like that's really essentially the
Fiat is
the
for no
beginning
one.
of the book. I explain the problem because I feel like until you understand the problem, you don't fully appreciate the solution. So I explain that the biggest problem, especially for the average person, is inflation. Because the wealthy and those well-connected, they've actually tremendously benefited from inflation. They own assets. Those assets have gone up in value, and they're probably sitting pretty, maybe looking at Bitcoin saying, I don't need this. But for the average person, the majority of people and the working class, they've been shut out of that ownership and that equity. And Bitcoin allows them to have it. That's what I think is most exciting about the whole entire network is it's an equity-based system, not a debt-based system like ours. A debt-based system does require inflation. That's why people are so scared of deflation, because in an inflationary credit-based system, deflation creates this toxic cocktail, if you will, as Jeff Booth puts it in his writings, and the whole thing collapses on itself. But in an equity-based system, that is where you can really have, for the first time, free market capitalism. And one thing that I've learned through Bitcoin and through great people like Jeff is we've never even experienced it. We've never lived in a free market. We don't know what capitalism really is. Everybody, especially young people, they demonize capitalism. And I did too at one point. When I graduated from college into the great financial crisis recession, I was like, capitalism is terrible. I mean, and crazy for me, right? Because my parents fled communism, and here I am, and I'm like, tax the rich. But I didn't understand. And our system, that wasn't capitalism. That was essentially socialism for the rich people. What we did after 08 and 09, we bailed out all the banks despite their risky behavior. Because they were so structurally important, too big to fail, the taxpayers bailed them out, and so many, like my family, lost their homes. That's so unfair. That's not capitalism. Capitalism means the consequences of risk are borne by those who take it. And we have not really had that. I mean, maybe, I guess you could argue the working class has felt it, like this rigorous sense of like fight to survive. But the whole system needs to be reordered. And we can only do that by rebuilding the foundation. And the foundation is like how we interact with each other financially. It's the money. The money is what's broken. The money is what needs to be fixed. The capital itself is what needs to be something that's immune to inflation that no one can control, so that it creates a new set of incentives. And those incentives are aligned with what actually provides value. And let the market set the price, right? Like that is, we shouldn't have Jerome Powell this week deciding what the interest rate is. It should be the market deciding what should be the price of money and what am I willing to lend it at. And so we haven't had that. And I think a lot of people don't realize it. So I sort of try to break all that down in a very, very simple, approachable way, how the banking system works and why every time they create new money, which is debt, it's all IOUs, it dilutes the purchasing power of your money and you had no say in it. And that can feel really frustrating, and it is frustrating, and it's not fair. It creates an inherently unfair system that leads to a tremendous amount of wealth concentration, and there is a solution, and that's why I cover the second half of the book.
Yeah. Of course, that's where we pivot and say, at least thank goodness there is a solution.
There's a solution.
Right. I feel like if this were 2007 or whatever, we would be gold bugs because we'd be just like desperately searching for how do we go backwards to the 19th century shiny yellow rock that didn't work. But thankfully, we have this strange, weird magic internet money that does seem like a solution. You touched on the inequality piece, which I think is fascinating, the wealth inequality and the growing gap there. And I think a lot of people will say, well, isn't Bitcoin just like making, people who got in early super rich? Or like, doesn't all the Bitcoin concentrated, in a few hands of very few small percentage of people? So how does Bitcoin solve wealth inequality?
Yeah, I actually find this criticism and question fascinating because if you measure Bitcoin in a finite, like a small amount of time, especially at the very, very beginning, absolutely. It has more wealth concentration, so to speak, because it's very new and there are very few holders. Like the pool of actual people who are holding or transacting in Bitcoin is very, very small. But if you zoom out and if you actually project what is happening to Bitcoin now over the next 10, 20, 50 years, you see that it's a far more egalitarian and distributed system than fiat. Fiat might seem more distributed, like especially at the beginning, but over time it concentrates. And Bitcoin's the opposite of that. And why is that? Well, we actually have been seeing it recently. Huge whales that have been sitting on thousands of Bitcoin after all these years, they're finally starting to put them back into the market, saying, you know what, I'm going to offload some of this. I'm going to take my profits. I actually don't need to be sitting on all of this. I want to diversify. Some of them went to buy houses. Some of them want to sit in cash. Some of them want to make other investments. So over time, Bitcoiners who have amassed quite a bit of financial power, they will sell Bitcoin into the market. And I think what's great is like Bitcoin is something where there's always a buyer and a seller. There truly is. And so over time, it becomes more and more distributed. And I think over the long run, I mean, if you're talking like 100 years from now, very few people will be transacting in like Bitcoin. It's all going to be Satoshis. We're all going to be talking, everything will be denominated in Satoshis because the velocity will have increased. You'll have billions, hopefully, of people on the network. And it'll be Satoshi based, not like Bitcoin transactions in you know the full coin. So I would argue that that's actually not true, and we see the evidence of it actually on the ledger and in the patterns that we've seen with long-term holders. Whereas the fiat system gets more and more concentrated over time because that's how it works, and the people who are closest just amass more and more, and it doesn't trickle to other people because it's infinite. Like you could just print more and then the people at the bottom are like, my money's now worth nothing. You could have $1 million and have it be worth nothing. And people in other countries have seen that happen with their currencies. So Bitcoin is very special because it is immune to that. And so I think over time, again, like if a wealthy person wants to buy something, or you know what, it could be like food or whatever, like they're going to have to part ways with some Bitcoin, right? Because people are going to say you have to pay me in Bitcoin. And so I actually see it as a much more over time distributed system. Not perfect, it's not going to be equal. I don't advocate for that, but it will not have the wealth concentration and inequality that fiat has over time.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think the other one that like you talked about, you know, big people having to part with their Bitcoin, and the idea that if you could have more and more just fiat dollars and become a fiat millionaire, we think in terms of I want more fiat dollars, but we don't think in terms of purchasing power, because a lot of people don't realize, well, you could actually not have to keep acquiring more and more Bitcoin for the value and the purchasing power of the Bitcoin to go up, which is sort of mind-blowing when you really start to try to wrap your head around it, where you could acquire more and more and more fiat and the purchasing power of your total overall fiat could still go down.
Exactly. And I worry that will happen, right? Like, I mean, we have projections from the Congressional Budget Office of basically like a $50 trillion deficit, and that's going to come at us very quickly over the next 2 decades at the most. Like that's 50 trillion, you guys. I mean, that's the issuer of the global reserve currency that runs the bank of the world is $50 trillion in debt. Our government is just running on a credit card that it never essentially actually has to pay back. It just rolls it on another credit card and on another credit card. And that's all being placed on as a burden on future generations. So again, thank goodness that we have Bitcoin because you get to opt out. And I try to make it clear in the book through a technology lens that this was sort of inevitable. Like it's no one party, no people that are specifically to blame. It's really just that gold was a very powerful form of hard money, and it had all of these wonderful properties that I explained in the book. But it had, as you scaled it in growing economies and to the globe, it had a defect, which is that you cannot settle it very quickly. So you kind of have to abstract it and paper over it, which is what led to fiat. And at first it was okay because it was tethered to gold. It had a backing, and then they loosened the backing, and then they loosened it some more until they let go of it entirely in 1971. And for me, that was a huge thing to understand when I went through my Bitcoin journey, because it's like, why was I not taught the importance of 1971 in school? Like the Bitcoiners taught me that. My education didn't. All my AP classes, you know, my master's degree, no one taught me about 1971 until the Bitcoiners did. But that was a huge important moment. We detached ourselves from something finite or, you know, with a low inflation rate, something tethered to reality, and we just started printing these promises. So how can we be surprised that now other countries are looking at us and going, well, why would we continue to trust them? They keep inflating. They can hit the magic money printer. We can't print dollars. Why would we continue to have dollars sitting in our reserves that government can print at the, you know, press of a button, and we have to work for it? no way, Jose, right? Like, we're going to add gold to our reserves. We're going to maybe diversify into other currencies. Eventually, they'll be buying Bitcoin. But like, it's such a natural outcome of the system that we created as of 1971. So thank goodness we have Bitcoin because it solves for the issues, the like Achilles heel of gold. And that's what I share also in the book.
100%. Well, this is going to sound crazy when I say this. I feel like people don't believe me when I say this, but I literally tried to check the math 5 times to make sure I was right. Because if you take the rate of growth of the federal debt from 1971 to 2025, and you project it out another 54 years, it literally reaches $1 quadrillion. And that's obviously not sustainable. Like, we obviously cannot go into $1 quadrillion worth of debt, so which means some point between now and 54 years from now, something's got to change. And I think, love what you say about it being inevitable, because I think if you just could tell somebody, well, like, what if you could just take the gold and dematerialize it and send it across the internet? Wouldn't that be like the most useful technology ever invented? Like, wouldn't that be pretty cool? And people are like, yeah, people are just like, oh, well, but this magic internet money thing is stupid and can't possibly work.
Or you have people like Peter Schiff who are like, well, but yeah, you still actually need the gold part. You gotta, we'll trust the stuff that represents the gold, I guess, but like, you still gotta have the gold. And it's like, what? Like, the trust is the problem.
You're right.
Okay, the trust is the intermediary is the problem. You can remove all of that with Bitcoin.
Well, he also said like he's going to tokenize gold, and then you can just use. Yeah. I jokingly called him shift bucks, because if he tokenizes the gold and he holds the gold, and then he just gives you the shift bucks, you guys can just trade the shift bucks. Yeah. And then aren't we just recreating what we already tried before, and it didn't quite work?
Yes, Bitcoin is no one's liability, but it does take a while to understand all of this. Peter still has not gotten it, but I did send him this book recently, so we'll see what he says.
Maybe this will be the final nail that Orange fills in.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Honestly, like I would just, that would mean so much to me if Peter read the book and went, you know what, maybe I'm not totally wrong, but maybe I might be wrong.
That would be the ultimate, feather in your cap if you could say, oh yeah, I wrote the book that orange pilled him, or at least finally got him to admit he was wrong. I will tell you, I do believe if he reads your book, he will secretly lie in bed at night and admit, he will secretly realize that he's wrong and you're right, but he'll never admit it out loud. Because like you said, a man whose livelihood depends on him not seeing the truth will never be able to see the truth.
I think he'll love the first half of the book. He'll love the first half, and then he'll like get angry at the second half, but that's okay.
Yeah, ironically, he would agree with 99.9% of everything in the first 120 pages.
Totally.
We talked about the papering over gold and having to solve the settlement transaction scaling problem of gold, and people say, well, Bitcoin can't be money, or because no one uses it as a medium of exchange. I like when they say no one uses Bitcoin, but one of the lines you have in the book is that a store of value is the most important use case for Bitcoin, not necessarily medium of exchange use case. So can you elaborate on that, or what do you say to people who say, oh, well, no one uses Bitcoin because they're not paying for coffee with Bitcoin?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think that they're ultimately, like, we're so lucky that it is both a network that is peer-to-peer and absolutely secure, backed by the most powerful computing network in the world and backed by energy. And so the network and the medium of exchange aspect is very important. But what I tried to convey in the book is that for the average person, like if you're working, your issue is probably not what currency am I going to use to buy my coffee? What payment mechanism am I going to spend at dinner tonight? It's probably, why can't I save? Why am I making, just barely enough to get by? That's your problem. So like, I think store of value is really, really critical. The inflationary aspect of our money that destroys purchasing power, that being removed from Bitcoin, that is so, so, so important. And I think is one of the most important use cases of Bitcoin as a savings technology. But that said, you wouldn't have Bitcoin if it wasn't a network, right? Like if it was just some digital rock that sat there, like you can also transact in it. It does solve for those issues with gold. You can have near instant settlement with the Lightning Network, right? But like truly like very, very quick settlement, ultra secure. And that is important, especially when you think about the globe at large. I mean, there are very, very real reasons why someone would want to transact in Bitcoin. And I think more merchants will eventually incentivize people saying like, hey, if you want to buy this, you either have to pay in Bitcoin, or if you pay in Bitcoin, you maybe get a discount. We're not really there yet, especially here in the West. I think people It's convenient to use your dollars, and plus, why wouldn't you want to spend your depreciating currency and ultimately hold your Bitcoin? But I do think things will evolve. And so for me, it's like the first and most important fix that I think Bitcoin solves, and the most important thing that everyone needs, is the ability to save. And then the second, spanning out from that, is the transactability of Bitcoin and using it more and more as a medium of exchange.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see a lot in response to that is, well, we need the 2% inflation. We need the money to lose some of its purchasing power over time. Otherwise, people will hoard the currency, which I think is very interesting that the fiat maxis have a derogatory term for saving, which is you're hoarding currency, and that's bad. What's your sort of response to people say, well, we have to have 2% inflation because
Yeah.
otherwise people will hoard currency and they won't invest?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating question that I do get a lot. There's this misconception that you need an elastic supply of money. And I didn't realize, again, that this comes from the Keynesian school of economics, which really puts an important role on the government and central authorities to sort of manage things. So instead of the invisible hand allowing the free market to sort of referee itself and have the activity happen freely, and be decided at the market level, you need sort of a watcher, a force that sort of regulates things and ultimately issues the money. And I reject that. And I didn't know that I would feel this way because we're not taught this in school, again, but you don't need inflation. That's one thing that I've learned through Bitcoin. And I would happily argue anyone about this. And I did a fascinating interview if anyone wants to watch. It's actually one of my most popular episodes that I've ever done. And it was this year with Jeff Booth, where when I was actually going through my manuscript, just trying to like really button things up and make sure that I have my message airtight, I did an interview with him that I didn't even plan to release. I just said, hey, can I record this? But I went back and forth on this inflation deflation thing because one of the biggest arguments from the TradFi and the fiat world is you need inflation or things will collapse. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier near the top of this interview. You need inflation in a credit-based system. If everything is built on debt, and everything is, expanding through these IOUs in order to produce less and less real growth. Yes, it's very, very scary to not have inflation because things will start to collapse. And the dollars that you have to pay back in the future are worth more than in the present, which is very scary for people taking on debt. That's the system we live in, right? So deflation is scary. But in the Bitcoin system, that is the deflationary system. If you start to price things in Bitcoin, the price of homes are coming down. They're becoming more affordable. The price of cars and healthcare and all the things you actually want to buy are becoming more affordable. It is the glimpse into the deflationary world that people are so scared of. And yet it creates all of this abundance because, as Jeff beautifully puts it, abundance in money means scarcity everywhere else. Scarcity in money creates abundance everywhere else. And it is beautifully said. So inflation, what he said in that interview is it's the greatest lie we've ever been told. We actually don't need it. It means that you inherently believe that we need theft in order for society to function. And that's absolutely not true. So long as the money is divisible and it can move rapidly across the world, which Bitcoin can, any number is enough as long as you can divide it among billions of people, which you can with Bitcoin.
Well, that was extremely well said. I watched that episode that you did with Jeff Booth, which was
good.
really cool. Yeah, it was like basically reading the Price of Tomorrow and then sitting in the room with someone asking the questions of like, okay, but how do you, pulling at the threads and being like, can you just explain that a little bit more? That was what the experience was
I asked all
like.
the dumb questions, so go watch me. I did. Yeah.
No, you did great because reading that book for the first time is like, eventually you come to realize, well, this is feels obvious. But at the very beginning, it's pulling at the seams of everything you have experienced in your life up until this point. It's very strange. Yeah. When you actually just try to sit back and think about it, why do Oreos cost more money every year? Shouldn't they be going down in price why does McDonald's cost more? Aren't they getting better at making hamburgers and more efficient? They're getting worse at making hamburgers, therefore they have to charge us more for them. It makes no sense when you really try to stare at it from that standpoint.
And that's the thing. Like, that's why I focused half the book on inflation, because it's like, it's so important. And none of us, like, the saddest reality is that all of us are sitting across the country fighting over politics when we should just be fighting against the financial system. And not like I'm not talking about pick a person and it's the system. It's this. Let's fix this. We have a fix now. We can fix the system and we can rebuild it. And we are doing that. It's just I think we have to show people that they have to care about it because us Bitcoiners get it and we understand that like inflation is the problem. Bitcoin is the solution. It's just really about showing a spotlight to other people to say, hey, like, isn't this common sense to you? Like exactly what you said. If technology is supposed to make our lives more efficient and better and drive prices down, why the heck is the price of everything going up? And once you peel back the layer starting from there, it's like, well, that's interesting. Like, why is that? Well, why is that? Well, oh, wait, like, what happened to the money and why are they issuing so much? And the banks are issuing more through fractional reserve banking. So once you are empowered with the knowledge that your dollars are just constantly losing value because of the supply going up and the dilution that's happening, you can empower yourself with the ability to do something about it.
I think that's really well said. Well, I'm going to pivot slightly, which my channel, I typically don't talk about like price predictions and stuff like that. I know you don't typically do like price predictions or whatever, but we are coming to the end of 2025, start of 2026. I'm curious if, as you think forward to 2026, you don't have to give a price prediction, but like, do you have any prediction or any thoughts about the next sort of year or so for Bitcoin? What you either think we'll see, what you want to see?
So I don't give price predictions because people would be disappointed by my price predictions. Something that people have to understand about me, and I think my followers do, is I come from scarcity. Like I come from an immigrant background. I know what it's like to lose everything. And so I like to keep my expectations very low. I have high standards, low expectations. So I always take the under. Like people share these massive price predictions and I'm always like, I hope they're right, but I tend to think that we're probably going to go up much slower. I'm very bullish on Bitcoin, but I just think that the growth will take a little bit of time and things happen out of the blue, right? Like black swans that we don't expect. And I think that we are going to face more macro headwinds, even though we might not want to, because there are these massive tectonic shifts that are changing on a global level. Like truly people are looking at the dollar system and things are changing and the reserve asset is changing, I think, sort of back to gold from US Treasuries as the primary reserve asset because of all the inflation that we've created and because we've weaponized the dollar. So, I think that with a global economy that's so interconnected and complex, you've got like the energy sector and we've got a lot of issues to deal with there. We've got, Japanese bond yields spiking and credit spreads and the arbitrage and hedge funds are our main source of demand for US Treasuries. Oh, but they're going to try the stable coins to sterilize it. It's like there's so much going on. So at any given moment, I feel like Bitcoin is just, it's so little, it can be hit by the waves of this macro ocean. But as it grows, it will be less volatile. So I still kind of just tell people zoom out because we're a $2 trillion asset class. And the global wealth, as money supply continues to expand, is literally almost $1 quadrillion, right? Like hundreds of trillions in bonds, hundreds of trillions in real estate, over 100 trillion in equities. Some of that is going to continue to switch to Bitcoin. And so it's this incredible asymmetric opportunity. Even though people think they're late, it's like, no, it eventually will hit $1 million a coin. It eventually will go more than that, right? Like save in Bitcoin. That's how you should look at things and don't stress about the daily price move. So I hope we end the year up and I hope that next year, I literally would be happy if we were at 150, 175 at the end of next year. I don't know, maybe we'll be higher, but I always just try to be a little more conservative on my expectations.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel the same way. I ignore most of the giant, crazy out there price predictions. And I just think of head down, stay humble, stack sats, study Bitcoin in the down times when it feels boring or you're bored with the price or whatever, and then grow your conviction. And that just allows you to use the power of the volatility, the power of the dollar cost average works in your favor if you stay humble and you stack continually, because then you're not worried about, one cycle top to the next. You bought all the lows in between and you benefit from that volatility. Yeah. Well, Natalie, this was awesome. I'm a huge fan. I appreciate you taking the time. Everyone absolutely should get Bitcoin is for everyone. Give it as a gift for birthdays or Christmas because it is a great entry point for somebody who doesn't understand the problem, doesn't understand Bitcoin, doesn't understand why any of this matters. It's like, okay, start them at square one. And it walks them through the problem very clearly and concisely. And then, obviously shines a light on the solution as well. So I think you did an amazing job with the book.
Thank you so, so much. Yeah, I'm blessed to have some incredible endorsements from Michael Saylor, Lynn Alden, Jeff Booth. But you know what? One endorsement really means a lot to me. My 11-year-old niece read this. And what she said after it is, I quote, "I want to work in Bitcoin." So I think I did pretty well. Please go out and get it.
There you go. Orange pilling the next generation. I love that. That's awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate it.